Okay, so today we'll talk about compiler design, which is also the name of the course. All right, so in the first lecture we learned that an executable is a partially evaluated interpreter on the program source code. All right, but this partial evaluation of the interpreter on the program source code, the result of the partial evaluation, which is also called the executable, should ideally be faster or in some way better, maybe shorter than executing the original interpreter on the original program source code, because otherwise there was no advantage of doing the partial evaluation upfront, right? So the improvement that we get by doing this partial evaluation upfront is can be thought of as the quality of the compilation. And you can imagine that a trivial compilation would involve just storing the interpreter with the program source code as a tuple, right? So in this case, the executable would just be the interpreter's code pasted along with the program source code. And when we invoke the executable, it just runs the interpreter, supplying the program source code as the first input, so the program input. Okay, but this is a trivial compilation, and the quality of compilation is nothing to speak about in this case. You can do something smarter, and one of the easiest things to do is to substitute the input program source code into the interpreter's implementation. This is, as we're going to learn later, this is somewhat like constant propagation. So imagine that you have a program and it's supposed to execute on some inputs, and you have two inputs that already know. Then what you can do, so let's say the inputs were X, Y, and Z, and of which you already knew X and Y to be, let's say, 2 and 3. So you can just substitute all occurrences of X with 2 and Y with 3, right? And there's something which is also called as constant propagation. You kind of propagate the constant value across the program. And so in this case, you could substitute the program source code into the interpreter code implementation. So in this case, for example, if the original interpreter was something like the following on the left, here you have a function called interpret that takes two arguments, prog and data. And let's say, it uses a loop for statement in prog, data equals eval statement comma data. And this loop continues until the statement says finish. And when the statement says finish, the interpreter will come out of the loop and then it will return the final value of data. Notice that here, this function called eval is something that the interpreter implements internally, and this eval function is what understands the high level instructions and kind of simulates them on the actual machine. All right, so now we know the program, and let's say the program was statement 1, statement 2, statement 3, statement 4, ... statement n. Let's say it's a program of n statements. So then I can specialize or partially evaluate the interpreter on that program, something like the following, right? So we get a new executable. And now this time the executable is just going to execute on data because the program has already been substituted inside the interpreter. And here what I have done is, instead of calling the original function eval on statement comma data, I have partially evaluated the eval function and the partially on different statements. So for example, when I partially evaluated eval on statement 1, I got the function eval statement 1, and then I partially evaluated eval on statement 2, and so on till statement n, and then I return data. Now there are two things that are happening here. First, I am partially evaluating eval on statement 1 and statement n statement n, which means that I'm substituting statement 1 into the logic or implementation of eval, just like I'm substituting the program into the implementation of the whole interpreter. And so that should make the execution of each eval call slightly faster, because we don't have to actually understand what is statement 1. It's already substituted inside the specialized program. And the second thing here is that I completely got rid of the for loop, right? So I don't need to have any for loop here, and I can just zip through all the statements one after another. Notice that I'm assuming here that these statements are there's no loop in the source code and things like that, and so it was possible to do something like this. All right, this is an improvement over the trivial compilation because A, I have removed the loop, and B, I have specialized the eval function for each of the statements. All right, but we can do better. And one idea here is that let's do local optimizations. So we already talked about specializing the evaluate statement I for each I. And that would be called a local optimization. So why do I call it a local optimization? Well, any optimization that is particular to a single statement or a part of it would, I'm calling a local optimization. And later I'm going to call any optimization that considers 2 or more statements a global optimization. All right. So in this case, specializing statement I for specializing eval for each statement I, for I from 1 to n, is a local optimization. Similarly, I could cache the generated or specialized code. All right. Now, so for example, let's say I specialized statement 1, then I specialized statement 2, and so on. And then let's say there was a loop in the source program. So now again, I'm supposed to go back and specialize statement 1. Now, maybe if I know that the loop is going to execute in the source code for 10 times, then maybe I could specialize each statement 10 times, in their correct order. So let's say the program was statement 1.n, and the entire program had an outer loop which is going to execute all these statements 10 times. Then I would have 10 into n. I would generate a program or code of size 10 into n, right? For eval statement 1, 2, 3, 4 to n, and then again eval statement 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Now I can do better than that. What can I do? Well, I don't need to generate the code for every instruction again and again, because it is the same instruction that is being evaluated in different iterations. I can cache the partially evaluated eval function for a given instruction, for a given statement, and then I can keep jumping to that whenever I need to, right? So in this example, I could just have a program which evaluates statements, which partially evaluates eval on each of the statements 1.n only once, and then for the second iteration, I'm just going to jump back to the partially evaluated implementation of the first iteration. All right. Now, what is the advantage that this would entail? Well, one thing is I have reduced the code size. All right, and reducing code size also means that I have reduced the running time often, because code is also stored in memory, and so getting the code from memory so that you can execute it takes some time, right? And if you have reduced the code size, you have to get less code from memory, and so you have made your program faster. All right. Okay. All right. Actually, caching and reuse of generated code is the most basic optimization. In reality, a statement in a long running program, for example, let's say you write a program in high level language like C or Java, a statement in your program is likely to execute for millions or billions of times, or maybe even trillions of times, right? And if it's going to execute, let's say, billions of times, then it doesn't make sense to generate a billion specializations of your instruction during compile time, and you would just generate one specialization, and then whenever that instruction is executed again, you're going to jump to the same place so that you can execute that specialization again. And this is such a basic optimization that it's not even called an optimization. And when we talk about compilation, we just kind of assume that this is given, that for every static instruction in the source code, we generate a static assembly set of instructions in a one-to-one correspondence, and then whenever that particular statement is executed in the source code, the corresponding statement gets executed in the assembly code. And we take that for granted. But notice that this is actually an optimization. All right. Now, before I move forward, I should say that there are two modes of compilation. All right. So recall that I said that compilation is the partial evaluation of the interpreter on the program source code. All right. And that's true for all languages. C, Java, Python, Perl, and so on. Now, we are generally familiar with some of these languages being called interpreted languages, and while others are called compiled languages. For example, often Java and Python are called interpreted languages, while C and C++ are usually called compiled languages. But I would, I don't think this distinction is very accurate, and actually, there is no such distinction, because any language could be an interpreted language and any language could be a compiled language. For example, there exist C and C++ interpreters. Conversely, there exist compilers for Java and Python. All right. So there's nothing fundamental about what mode you choose to run, whether you run it in interpreted mode or whether you run it in compiled mode. That has nothing to do with the language itself. It's just a matter of engineering choice by the designers of that language, or the ease of implementation that the designers of the language chose, right? So, for example, C and C++ are generally considered performance-sensitive languages, and so their designers basically said that compilation is the dominant way of using those languages. Similarly, Java and Python are languages that are kind of more concerned with safety and less concerned with performance, at least historically. That's no longer true today. And so the initial implementations of these languages, at least, were through an interpreter. In either case, neither of these languages today are purely compiled or purely interpreted. And so I just wanted to kind of break this myth that some languages are purely interpreted languages and others are purely compiled languages. Compilation is just interpretation which is partially evaluated before the actual execution. All right. Compilation is a process of partial evaluation of an interpreter on a program source code. Yeah, we should always remember that. Now the question is, when is the compilation actually taking place? Option 1, this partial evaluation or this compilation process is done ahead of time in an offline phase, so that you can run this program without worrying about compilation. And this is called static compilation or ahead of time compilation. This is the kind of compilation we are usually used to doing when we use our C and C++ programs, and we use compilers like GCC. All right, we just compile and store the result ahead of time, and then we can execute the result, which is the executable, any number of times on different inputs. Now, there's another type of compilation, which is dynamic compilation or just-in-time compilation. Here, we don't compile the source code ahead of time. When we start running that program source code, in other words, when we start interpreting that program source code, during this interpretation, we decide that we are going to partially evaluate the interpreter, or we're going to start compiling the executable as it starts running, right? So we are going to start compiling the program source code to generate the executable, and this is just-in-time compilation. Now, examples of just-in-time compilation are, for example, Java made just-in-time compilation very popular, and there are just-in-time compilers for other languages like Python and Perl and so on. Okay, so notice, and so in the implementation scheme of languages, on one hand we have statically compiled frameworks or static compilation frameworks. And then on the other hand, we have purely interpreted frameworks where we don't make any pretense of trying to partially evaluate the interpreter on the program source code. And then somewhere in the middle is just-in-time compiler, which would start by interpreting, but in the middle we'll decide that, okay, this part of the code is really executed a lot and interpreting is really slow, so let's compile it on the fly, right, as I'm running it. And so because we are just compiling the program on the fly at the time of running, we call it just-in-time compilation, just in time of execution. All right, so what are the trade-offs of doing ahead of time versus just-in-time? Well, first of all, static ahead of time compilation has no runtime cost. You're doing it in an offline phase, and usually it doesn't get counted on the actual execution of a program. So think about it. Let's say you're running a web server. Then the web server, if it has been compiled ahead of time, it doesn't matter how long it took to compile, right? Because the web server is going to serve billions of requests, and each request that gets served has nothing to do with the time taken by each request to get served, has nothing to do with the amount of time it took to compile the web server. All right. However, there are some problems. One of the problems is that although the running of the executable is fast, the total, which is compile plus run, may actually be slower than just-in-time compilation or even interpretation. All right. So sometimes it may make sense to look at both of these together. For example, some programs are only executed a few times, and if that's true, then compilation cost should be considered. A much more serious problem with static compilation is that at the time of static compilation, you don't know what part of your program is going to be executed more and which part of the program is going to be executed less. You also don't know what is the typical nature of the inputs that this program is executing on. Now, all this lack of information basically means that the compiler should just make some guesses and generate some code, and those guesses may be actually proved incorrect at the time of running, in which case your program will run slower than optimal. And so this is a serious con of static ahead of time compilation, that not enough information is available during compilation. Let's look at dynamic just-in-time compilation. So in this, you generate machine code at runtime, as we just discussed, all right? And the other important part of dynamic just-in-time compilation is that you cache the generated code. Now, this is a very important optimization for just-in-time compilation, because if you partially evaluated the interpreter on some part of your program, then you want to store the result of that partial evaluation so that the next time that part of the program executes, you don't have to redo the partial evaluation. Now, unless you do this caching, the idea of just-in-time compilation is meaningless, because that would mean too much overhead of compilation. Because if the same part of the code is executing a billion times and you have to do this compilation a billion times, then it's kind of not a very good scheme. On the other hand, if you cache the compilation the first time it executes, the rest of billion minus one times, you don't have to compile it, and you get the compiled code for free. And so that's a great thing about just-in-time compilation, and caching is very important there. Just like ahead of time compilation, we are actually caching. All right, so the good things about just-in-time compilation is that there is a lot of runtime information during the compilation. For example, because the program is already running and maybe it has already run 10 times or 100 times, you already know what is typically running, what is the typical nature of inputs, what is the typical paths that this program is taking, and so on. And so you can make better decisions, optimization decisions. Similarly, you only need to compile relevant portions. So let's assume that your program is really large. Let's say your program is as large as the GCC compiler, but or the Linux kernel. Now, compiling these programs, these large programs like the GCC compiler and the Linux kernel, takes hours. But if only a portion of these programs is going to get executed or is getting executed while the interpretation is happening, then only those relevant portions need to be compiled, and that saves a lot of compilation time. And that's also a big pro of just-in-time compilation. Of course, the big con or the big disadvantage of doing just-in-time compilation is that you have to pay runtime compilation cost. Now, one thing that is that people do to manage the cost of dynamic just-in-time compilation is you do caching, which we just discussed. In this case, the compile cost is paid only once for a fragment that would probably execute millions or billions of times, in which case the cost of compilation gets amortized over that many times, which usually is a good trade-off. And the other thing is that because you have multi-core processors today, and some of those processors are usually lying idle, just-in-time compilation makes more sense in modern hardware environments because you can dedicate one core to doing this just-in-time compilation without affecting the speed of the rest of your program. Often, I would say advantages are much more than cost, especially for long-running programs of just-in-time compilation. However, just-in-time compilation is more prone to programming errors because it is a more complex system than a static ahead-of-time compilation system. All right. Okay, now we discussed some local optimizations such as substitution and caching. But now let's take some more examples of what more optimizations I could do during this partial evaluation of the interpreter on the source code. So global optimizations span multiple statements or program fragments. And why would there be an opportunity to do global optimizations? Well, one reason is because the programmer wrote suboptimal code to begin with. So for example, the programmer wrote x equals 1, x plus plus. Now the optimizer can easily optimize this to saying x equals 2. Now, why would the programmer write suboptimal code? There are many reasons that the programmer may want to write code that has lots of abstractions. For example, due to debug flags or due to function calls and things like that. And so things that actually get together are not kind of obvious in the source code. And sometimes the programmers are just lazy and they're not worried about optimization, and in which case the compiler can come to your rescue. All right, that's one reason why there may be an opportunity to do global optimizations. Another reason is because low-level syntax is sometimes richer. The assembly level, machine level syntax could be richer and have more opportunities or more instructions or more opcodes than the high-level syntax. So here's an example. Let's say, in the C language, we have the multiply and the add operator and the assignment operator. So let's say in the C language, I wrote this code t, which represents a temporary, equals x into y. And then I wrote z equals t plus a. Now on the hardware, let's say x86 hardware machine, you have an instruction which just does multiply and add in one go. All right. But there is no such operator in the high level language, right? For example, C. And so the only way I can expect that the program will use this instruction called multiply add is because the compiler would have converted sequences of multiply and add with this single instruction, right? And so these kind of optimizations are important and to be able to use the full power of the machine. In fact, in the last lecture, I talked about vectorization, and I said that high-level languages don't have vector instructions, but low-level machines do have vector instructions. And so the onus of being able to use the vector instructions in hardware lies with the compiler. All right. Now there's another reason why global optimizations may get enabled, and this is because some optimizations enable more optimizations. All right. So here's an example. Let's say x equals 1, y equals x plus 2, z equals y plus 3. Now if I look at y and z here, they look like perfectly a good piece of code, and I don't need to optimize it any further. But then when I look at x and y, the first two statements, then I can see that I can replace x plus 2 with just 3. And then again, when I look at the second and third statement, I can see that z can be replaced by z equals 6. And that's what I get on my right. And what happened here was, because of one optimization, another optimization got triggered. And this is a very common thing in compilers. On the other hand, it is also common for one optimization to preclude or thwart another optimization. All right. So because one optimization triggered, the other optimization can no longer trigger. All right. This is also a very common phenomenon, and this is a big problem in compiler design. And causes complexity. So here's an example. Let's say I have t equals x into 2 and y equals x plus a. Now the compiler has some logic that says that whenever you see a multiply operator followed by an add operator, you can convert it to the mul-add operator, right? This is something that we saw a couple of slides back. But then there is another rule in the compiler which says anytime you see multiplication by 2, then you can convert this to a left shift by 1. All right. So here you're removing the multiply and replacing it with a faster left shift operation. Now this is all good, except that if you do the first one, which is conversion of multiply to left shift, then you cannot grow from the first one to the second one, because the compiler has no rule which says that if you left shift and then add, then you can replace it with mul add. All right. So this becomes a problem, and this kind of a problem where you want to decide which optimization to apply so that you don't thwart other optimizations, because some optimizations will enable some other optimizations. On the other hand, some optimizations may preclude or thwart the other optimizations, and this becomes a big problem. And this is a well-known problem in compiler design, and is popularly known as the phase ordering problem. And we are going to learn more about this as we go along in the course. Okay, theoretically, what is a compiler supposed to do? A compiler is supposed to take as input a program source code and an instruction set architecture. For example, we could take a C program and an instruction set architecture like the x86. And it's supposed to generate the ideal compiler is supposed to generate the optimal machine code for that source code and a given instruction set architecture. Now it turns out that this is an undecidable problem. All right, so this is an undecidable problem, and so, you know, except in certain special situations where the programs are really small, one cannot solve this problem. And so what compilers are doing is they are doing the best effort. Things are improving year by year, but we are nowhere close to what could be the optimal.